Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Haley Veruso. I'm the Director of Anti-Trafficking Services at Preble Street. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker. Preble Street is a social work agency housed in Southern Maine. Our focus is really to support folks experiencing homelessness and to engage in anti-poverty and anti-hunger efforts. Knowing that anti-trafficking services is an intersectional issue, it fits really beautifully into the continuum of care of services that Preble Street offers. My background very briefly is in mental health and victim services broadly over the last 15 years, primarily here in Maine. Didn't go through this without a little bit of tech issues. There we go. Great. So I want to give a bit of an overview of our anti-trafficking services program and how it was established at Preble Street. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary as a standalone program here because we were established in 2013. We were established in the back of the Teen Center here in Portland. And for folks who aren't aware, we have a low barrier teen center for young people experiencing homelessness. But there became acute awareness that young people in our space were experiencing something that didn't fit neatly into all of the other categories that we were used to seeing in that space. And as we developed language around what was happening, we realized that what these young people were experiencing were various forms of human trafficking. Now, in 2013, human trafficking here in Maine became synonymous with sex trafficking. But the reality is human trafficking is a larger umbrella term, which I'll define in just a few minutes, that encompasses both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. But like every program, we experience an evolution over time. We began as a coalition model with partnerships through both our sexual assault agency, SARSM, and at the time, Family Crisis Services, our DV agency, now known as Through These Doors. We have since become a standalone program that is funded in various ways. We're exclusively grant funded, which allows us to support folks regardless of healthcare status or enrollment in other programs. Our program supports survivors of human trafficking, so any form of human trafficking of all ages. We serve minors through the lifespan, all gender identity, all immigration statuses, and regardless of when the trafficking occurred. So we work with folks who are currently experiencing trafficking situations, who have recently exited from a trafficking situation. But we also work with a fair amount of adult survivors who may have recently attained language or find themselves in a space where they can speak about a childhood experience of trafficking. And so regardless of when this happened, we're able to show up and support folks, which can be incredibly powerful in that people don't need to come here defining their experience. There's a shared understanding that we have the language to be able to engage in conversation right off the bat if folks want to about what they've endured in their lifetime. And our work is guided by a survivor-centered and empowerment-based model. It's probably better defined as a human rights perspective. We believe that the people that we work with are smart, dignified, savvy, resilient people who have survived their whole lives without us and will continue to survive their lives without us after this moment in time of a privilege that we can support them through our various forms of services. We also work in a trauma-informed and harm reduction-oriented perspective. I do think it's helpful to define human trafficking before we launch into what our programs are. And please know, if folks are interested in a deeper dive into this content and into this topic, we offer trainings as part of our work for free. Human trafficking is any compelled activity, whether for labor, services, or commercial sex, where force, fraud, or coercive methods are used for someone else's economic gain. Human trafficking is both a public health issue. It's rooted in structural oppression, systemic inequity and oppression, and therefore solutions and efforts to address trafficking must be broad. Human trafficking is also an economic crime. There's something inherently transactional when we're talking about trafficking under the legal federal definition. So in 2000, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was established. That gave folks shared language. It legally defined severe forms of trafficking, but it also created other structures in place. Prosecution, criminal prosecution and penalties of traffickers, immigration protections for foreign-born victims, and civil remedies and victims' benefits. Language is a key part of the work that we do in anti-trafficking work because language helps us define what's happening for folks. And so human trafficking, again, to reach that federal definition, force, fraud, or coercion must be present, except in instances where young people are involved in commercial sex. So again, commercial sex just simply means transactional sex. Under the federal act, any minor engaged in commercial sex, so trading sex for a place to stay, trading sex for money, for anything of value, including sexually explicit images, is considered commercial sex and thereby considered a victim of human trafficking under the federal act. It's also commonly referred to as commercial sexual exploitation of children, or CSEC. But again, human trafficking broadly is an umbrella term, like I said, which encompasses both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. You all don't need to know exactly how we're funded, and I still think it's helpful to give a little context as to how each of these programs functions as a distinct program and project. But again, when you refer to us, all you have to know is that you're working with somebody who may benefit from our services. We receive funding from the Department of Justice Office of Victims of Crime for an intensive case management services program. So again, this is really our catch-all program. We are virtually able to serve any survivor of trafficking. Again, both sex and labor trafficking, regardless of age, gender identity, immigration status, type of trafficking, or when that trafficking occurred. We also recognize that screening can be a harmful process, and we're consistently reworking our process to ensure that we're really rooted in that trauma-informed lens that we say that we are. And so we have the ability to work with folks for a period of time as we're getting to know them to make a determination of whether they're eligible for services, because folks are eligible for our services if they meet the federal definition of trafficking. We provide survivor-centered case management services that is rooted in harm reduction and trauma-informed care. There is an intentional focus on safety planning in our program, though, and so we work alongside other community providers to ensure that we are providing holistic safety care and safety planning with survivors that we're working with that is deeply rooted in their sense of safety and in what has kept them safe before and what will continue to keep them safe. We also provide advocacy and coordination of resources. We do a fair amount of advocacy within systems, both to improve our responses to human trafficking and infrastructure to human trafficking here in Maine, but also advocacy because we know that many of the survivors we work with have criminalized behavior. And so what I mean when I say that is folks are seen through the criminal legal system, not through the lens of survivor or victim, but they come in contact through that system as somebody who is being charged with criminal activity. So we do a fair amount of advocacy to ensure that we have an understanding of what choice really means in these circumstances, because choice implies alternatives. We also work to ensure that there's survivor leadership opportunities. Survivor expertise, lived expertise, is a key part of the anti-trafficking movement, both here in Maine and nationally. We're working to continuously support survivors through our Survivor Advisory Board efforts, where folks are compensated for their lived expertise to inform both programmatic decisions, but also, like I said before, statewide responses to trafficking and exploitation. The wildflower room, this picture here, is from a meditation room within our healing center. I'll share a bit more about that in a few minutes. Our program also is a deeply nimble program. And so when we see gaps in services, we ensure that we go for funding streams that will help fill those gaps. Unsurprisingly, housing is one of the largest needs that survivors come to our program identifying. It's consistently been about 90% of the folks who come into our services identifying housing as the #1 need that they have, both to meet their basic needs, but also for any type of meaningful safety planning. We receive funding through HUD, Housing and Urban Development, for what's called a joint component grant. So we're funded for both transitional housing and rapid rehousing. Our transitional housing program is what's called a scattered site model. So we master lease or global lease two bedroom units in Cumberland County, where survivors are able to have the immediate need of housing stability met for a short period of time, We say 2 to 6 months, but it's often longer because 6 months is a short period of time to attain long-term housing in our community now. And we provide folks with supportive services, housing stability work, and we work to ensure that somebody has a long-term plan for housing through our rapid rehousing program. So any individual enrolled in transitional housing has the option to then be supported by our rapid rehousing program, which simply means we're going to provide housing first focused case management services. We work with individuals to determine what housing stability could look like. That could be rental assistance through our program. We have the privilege to support folks for up to 24 months with rental assistance. And we know that we would do a great disservice to individuals if we paid rent for 24 months with no practice of financial stability work and then left after that 2-year period of time. So if folks are accessing rental assistance, we're really working with them on financial literacy. How does money come into your home? How does money leave your home without judgment? We also have access to specific housing vouchers here at Preble Street, which is oftentimes how we're able to support folks in attaining ongoing stable housing. We support folks in York, Cumberland, Androscoggin, and Saginaw counties through this model, and we'll likely have the ability to support more counties than that as we continue to staff up this program. This is a program that goes through coordinated entry, which I don't want to spend too much time on, but is necessary to just lift up, as coordinated entry is the system that the state of Maine is using to help prioritize folks for different housing resources, but can certainly answer questions if people have them. The primary criteria to support folks in this program is that somebody's 18 years or emancipated, as they need to be able to sign a lease, and that they're fleeing or attempting to flee human trafficking. Now, that language is entirely defined by the person. There's no way to check to see if somebody's fleeing or attempting to flee. That is self-defined. And so we believe survivors, and we would believe survivors when they come into this program as well. So transitional housing, again, we're housing 4 survivors right now. That's our max capacity. And we have about 15 individuals enrolled in our rapid rehousing program. Lastly, we were recently awarded a grant through the Howard Buffett Foundation to enhance and expand our efforts to address labor trafficking and exploitation in specific sectors. So we're focusing on agriculture, seafood process, and the experience of forced criminality, which is exactly what it sounds like when somebody's trafficking experience required them to engage in criminal activity. This is a statewide project, and we found ourselves in northern Maine, Aroostook County, far more often than we ever have been, because we're seeking to ensure that workers in agriculture have a sense of what their rights are, regardless of their status. We're working with community-led partnerships in these counties to ensure that people have the information on what labor trafficking means, the differences between labor trafficking and labor exploitation. And it's also a project that funds multiple programs here in Maine. And so it's a collaborative effort, between Preble Street, ILAP, Pine Tree Legal, and Maine Mobile Health Program. The intention behind that is to ensure that we can truly wrap around folks who have experienced labor trafficking or labor exploitation here in the state of Maine. ILAP to provide immigration relief, Pine Tree Legal to look at civil remedies to address human trafficking situations, and Maine Mobile Health Program to support farm workers in particular with their medical and mental health needs. Since starting this project, we have seen our numbers shift dramatically in terms of who we're supporting, who has experienced labor trafficking and labor exploitation, primarily because we have the resources in order to do outreach. And again, really working to ensure that our state and our community recognize that human trafficking encompasses more than one experience. It can be really tricky to tease out the nuance between labor trafficking and labor exploitation, which is why we're able to support folks who are identified in either experience, because we also know that there's quite a bit of fluidity between those two experiences. What's exciting about this funding opportunity is that Preble Street is the largest funded project that's services forward. What I mean when I say that is historically, the Buffett Foundation has funded law enforcement as the backbone organization to address labor trafficking and subcontracted with smaller organizations to provide supportive services. We're trying to reframe that law enforcement does not need to be the backbone organization to address labor trafficking and exploitation. And actually, that can be a really harmful experience because of the fear of systems that so many people rightfully have. And so we're given a real privilege opportunity, a little bit of pressure, but in a positive way, to show that services forward can help address issues related to labor trafficking and labor exploitation. And that means intervention with law enforcement is guided by the survivor if and when they want that form of intervention. Here in Portland, we also offer a healing center. It's at 55 Portland Street. It's not a confidential location, but we also don't scream from the rooftops what we are. And so here we offer drop-in hours every Tuesday from 12 to 3, so happening right now, where survivors of trafficking can come into our space, have a bit of communal casework, meaning they can meet with a case manager or an advocate in the moment to address their concerns, to schedule an intake for our program. We also have tons of basic need items: clothing, hygiene products, food, water, meals. And we're really trying to lift up the Healing and Healing Center. So each month we're focusing on a different activity if folks want to do that. We had planting last month, we have vision boards this month, and it's really just an opportunity to support individuals in building a sense of community as they want to. But again, it's also a lower barrier way for folks to come into contact with our program. You see a lot of individuals who are experiencing literal homelessness who may not have access to a phone or our program in any other way. So we try to ensure that any space that survivors may be coming in contact with has a flyer so that folks are aware that they can come into our space anytime between 12 and 3 on Tuesdays, and they know that they can meet somebody in the moment. We also have partnerships with both SARSM and Through These Doors, who also come and provide drop-in services during this time period as well. We don't require folks to self-disclose at the door. We don't ask for any type of identifying information. Again, we believe people when they walk through our doors. And so please feel free to connect with us. Ultimately, you are likely seeing individuals with the intersectional experiences of trafficking. And our goal by sharing our resources, sharing our services with all of you, is so that we can help bridge the connection between the work we do and the work that you all do. Again, if you're interested in developing any type of assessment tools or protocols around assessment for human trafficking, reach out. If you're interested in doing a deeper dive into human trafficking and learning more about that experience and what that can look like here in Maine, but as well as globally, please, again, don't hesitate to reach out.